Welcome to another Bleacher Report stream here with James Palmer. I will be going through the next 30 minutes, going through a lot of head coaching news, going through some of the things that are transpiring within the postseason, but mostly we're going to focus on, obviously, that head coaching carousel that continues to spin. More and more spots have been filled. We'll go through those. We'll also go through the ones that are still open and who we should be looking at. Remember, we will be here each and every Tuesday at 2 o'clock Eastern doing this. That's our new time slot. I feel pretty comfortable with it. I'll be going into the chat on the Copilot here each and every time we finish a subject and a topic, and then we'll move on, and I'll try to answer as many of these as I possibly can. We're going to go through the Bills situation right now, and obviously relieving Sean McDermott of his duties. I was at that game. I talked to some people in the building, so I'll tell you what I've gleaned from that situation and what they could be looking for moving forward. Harbaugh and kind of how that dynamic with New York is going to transpire as they move forward in their partnership. He was introduced today, had his introductory press conference there with the Giants. Also, the latest on, I mentioned all these other openings that could potentially be there, and some of them that got filled, and what you need to know about those spots that got filled, because two of them just got filled recently. And then what's next for CJ Stroud and the Houston Texans? Big decisions to be made there in Houston by Nick Caserio and D'Amico Ryans about their quarterback that started off with one of the best rookie seasons of all time. And now we saw what happened in the last two postseason games. And then Jarrett Stidham, right here in Denver, what he's going to do on the football field in that AFC Championship game, we have no idea. But I do know a few things leading into it that I do want to let you know. All right. Let's go and start off with Buffalo and their head coaching search. First, before we get to that, the structure of the organization has changed. It was always Sean McDermott, and we're going to talk a lot about this today. The structure differs in every single building. It was always Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott reporting to Terry Pegula, the owner. That has now changed in the same press release, which a lot of people were curious about. Brandon Beane actually gets a promotion and not just general manager anymore, also is now president of football operations, and whatever coach they now hire will report to Beane. Beane will then report to Terry Pegula. It is essentially one of those vertical structures as opposed to those collaboration structures across, which we'll talk about with some of those other openings that are out there. Now, keep an eye on relationships to Josh Allen. I would think that that plays a part in this. Is that Brian Daboll, who has a great relationship with Allen, who has a great relationship with other people in that building, is from Western New York, understands everything that would transpire with it. I think they are really peaking towards that offensive side of the ball. When I was on that sideline before that game against Denver, it was a loose group. I think they definitely thought they could win that football game, but there was also part of when I had these conversations that was, we're kind of running out of time. This is a window here with one of the best players, and in their minds, the best player on the planet. And he turns 30 this offseason. I put it out on Twitter a little while ago. Like, the age 30 is so big in the NFL. We've talked about it during free agency, trades, contracts, everything. Well, they're looking at Josh Allen in May turning 30 and going, how do we make sure we can make the most of the window that we have left? I would look on the offensive side of the ball. Look for somebody that they'd like to pair with him for the duration of his time in Buffalo in the rest of his career. There's a sneaky name that I kind of have circled, and that's Davis Webb, who is the passing game coordinator and quarterback coach in Denver. Yes, he does not call plays. I think he called plays for one game during the preseason. I think the team actually loved what he did. But Sean Payton obviously calls the plays for the Denver Broncos. Davis Webb has an unbelievable relationship with Josh Allen. I actually saw the two of them talking for a long time on the field prior to that divisional game between the Broncos and the Bills. There's a lot of people that love him in that building. He was a backup quarterback for Allen. He knows a lot of what goes on there. He's only 30. He's young, but they are not the only team that I think is interested in him as a potential candidate for a head coaching job. He can't interview. He can't do the second round of the in-person interviews because he's still on the Broncos staff and they're in the AFC Championship game. But if some spots are still open, I would guarantee you that Davis Webb is going to be one of the guys that's brought in. I would put the Raiders into that conversation. I think they want to schedule an in-person with him when they have the opportunity to, if their job is still open. I would look for his as a sneaky name for this Bills job. Yes, inexperienced, very much so, but I would say in all of his interviews, he has blown teams away in how he's approached it. So I would look at that side of the ball as what, Buffalo's kind of looking at, and I would not say this is an overstatement by any stretch. This might be the most important decision in the history of Buffalo sports. Who is the next head coach working with Josh Allen, who is a generational quarterback? This is an opening that is really when I talk to people across the league, doesn't come open very often. I know we said that about the Ravens job, and you could say there's a lot of similarities between the two. And I think you could say that possibly about the Steelers job just because of, how it's such a job that doesn't get much turnover. But this with Josh Allen is viewed across the league as just a golden opportunity. Some people I talked to actually said, is Kevin Stefanski kicking himself? Is John Harbaugh kicking himself in a sense? I think those organizations, the Giants and Falcons, are actually very happy they got their deals done. But that's where I would look when you're looking at Buffalo. All right, before we move on, Kubiak with Jim Schwartz as DC. I guess that's for Cleveland. I hope Dayball gets it. Zach Orr to the Giants. I think that's one that a lot of people have been kind of connecting the dots there. Matt Nagy time in Buffalo. Trubisky reunion. Oh, boy. Nagy is still out there. We'll get to that when we get to the Titans job where they picked Robert Saleh over Matt Nagy, essentially, and Saleh blew them away in that interview. Udinski to Cleveland. I had a conversation with him a few weeks ago. He was kind of excited about what this Hudson cycle was going to be. He's a young offensive mind that a lot of people think the absolute world of, I would say, and some offensive minds that people really, really trust. Bean is the one who should have been fired. Horrible draft picks over the years. What a joke and what a horrible decision. I would also put this in there with the way this is now aligned with this vertical type of structure, and now it all falls on Brandon Bean. Yes, more power. Yes, with great power comes great responsibility. I would say that now all the roster issues that have happened, and Sean McDermott did have a say in their roster. When they were kind of more horizontal, he played a part in their roster decisions. Now it all falls on Brandon Bean. So you could say horrible decision. There's been some questionable draft picks. I know Sean McDermott's been very disappointed with the Keon Coleman pick, as well as others and some other things that have transpired. But I would say this, it now all falls on Brandon Bean. So, yeah, has to deliver. Where is McDermott going? Some people ruled out and publicly ruled out maybe spots like Vegas or Arizona because they're full rebuilds and he's in his 50s and he's been to the postseason season after season throughout the course of his career in Buffalo. When I talked to a couple people, I thought Arizona would be perfect. Now, I'll get to what I think is Arizona's situation, but that's a full rebuild right now. And what did he do in Buffalo? Completely changed the culture, completely rebuilt the brand, did a brilliant job in terms of turning around an organization that was a bottom feeder for a long time and made it a legitimate Super Bowl contender. Yes, didn't get to the top, but changed everything. I would think Arizona would be an interesting spot. I would look at, the Ravens do things differently, and I'll get to it, and maybe I'll just get to all those in a second. But I think the Ravens would be interesting. All right, Harbaugh and the Giants dynamic. Let's get to that because there's not a whole lot here other than the press conference happened. A lot of people said there was a hang-up really on, John Harbaugh wanting to report directly, and again, this is structure, to the Mara family. That's John Mara and his brother Chris. And I would say this. John Harbaugh kind of downplayed it during the press conference, saying we're all going to work together. We all report to the ownership, to the boss anyways. I don't think this was a huge sticking point. What I think needed to happen, to my understanding, was that John Harbaugh needed to get to know Joe Schoen better. And Joe Schoen, the general manager, played a huge part in getting John Harbaugh, to my understanding, to get that job. Then they spent more time together, and he kind of understood who he's going to be working with side by side with Joe Schoen. But also you have to remember, 18 years in Baltimore. He was in a structure there in Baltimore where he reported directly to Steve Bisciotti, and it was a structure that he liked. He comes from an organization that has a lot of things figured out. He wanted some of those figured out before he exactly put pen to paper. That's some of the stuff in the analytics department he has questions about. I think he liked their sports science side of things, but there's other aspects of, that outside of just the roster, John Harbaugh was looking at, and I think that structure was one of them. I don't think there was a problem with the structure. I think Joe Schoen knows it's going to be somewhat collaborative anyways, but the reporting structure is essentially that. I don't think it's a big hang up as some people maybe said it was. All right, let's get to the stuff that everybody wants to hear. This is what I see in the chat right now, which is about the head coaching cycle, the latest on this cycle. Let's go through the ones that are filled first, and then we'll go to what else is out there? I get McDermott being fired 9 years, no Super Bowls, 13 seconds did him in, and a disruption going on with Bean and McDermott power struggle. Man, I was at that game with 13 seconds. I was on the sideline for that game. Just unbelievable. They have fallen at the hands of Patrick Mahomes repeatedly in the postseason, and this one just broke the Bills. I'll just say this. Being in that locker room, seeing Josh Allen, I've never seen him like that before. I've been in that locker room for every single postseason loss of the Josh Allen era except one. So I've watched that happen every time. This one felt different. After the game, it felt different. And when I asked around and with my colleague Mike Silver, who works at The Athletic and had a great piece with, you could tell some knowledge there, neither one of us got really any sort of assurance that Sean McDermott was safe after the game. I think we were a little surprised, maybe. I think he was surprised, but I do think something did have to change. All right, here we go. Let's get into what's going on, um, of what's happening moving forward with some of these openings. Okay, the Titans land Robert Saleh late last night. Had a chance to talk to some people. Essentially, what happened is in this lengthy interview, he kind of sold the direction he wanted for this entire organization. Now, what has been happening and how that aligns with what Mike Morganzi, the general manager, and his group have been wanting to do is this whole season has been about evaluating who they want to be a part of that roster, who are their guys. I was told there's a number of guys on that team that they would have never drafted, not because they don't think they're talented, they're just not their type of player for one reason or another. And they've been going through that process of how they create the identity of this roster, how they create the culture of this building. And Robert Saleh came in and kind of displayed how he would do that. They were looking for somebody that had a massive presence within a room when they walked in it. And I think Robert Saleh, from his bald head and stature, maybe does that a little bit, but everything else he brings to the table, I think plays a part in that as well. So what happened was Saleh comes in that interview that was very lengthy, comes in and kind of wins that part of the thing. Now, the other part, which was kind of 1B, is what do you do with Cam Ward, where all of our eyes now are going to be on who he hires as the offensive coordinator. Right before this started, I sent a couple of texts. No plan yet in place for the offensive coordinator, to my understanding, but you have to look at some of the names that could be tied to Robert Saleh. And I think whoever lands this job, and it's a variety of guys possibly, could change the perception of what we think about what Robert Saleh does with this job and what they do moving forward. He gets the 5-year deal. And I think what he did in this season with the 49ers defense that was just lacking so much talent because of injuries, oftentimes ownership groups and general managers look and go, look what he did with a lot of backups. Look what they did against the Philadelphia Eagles with their 5th, 6th, 7th rated linebackers in terms of the depth chart. That oftentimes proves to those decision makers this is a really good coach. Those guys are not starting for a reason usually. So when you see those guys play very well, you go, that's a result of very good coaching. And I think that played a part in Robert Saleh becoming more attractive as a candidate. This leaves Matt Nagy really essentially without a job very quickly. Eric Bieniemy, to my understanding, I've been told this has been in the works for a while now. Andy Reid contacted Bieniemy after that loss that Chicago had to the Rams. He is going to come back as the offensive coordinator. It's nothing final yet, but that's the expectation. And that means Matt Nagy is now available as an OC elsewhere. That means he's available as a potential head coach elsewhere. He was kind of the front runner for this job, but Saleh, with everything I listed, kind of went in there and took that spot. Now, Jeff Hafley, he comes in and gets that Dolphins job. This is not a surprise really at all. His relationship with the newly hired general manager they have, John Eric Sullivan, also from Green Bay, what the Dolphins are looking for and what Hafley checked in terms of boxes, evaluation of talent. They have a more horizontal structure. It is him. It is John Eric Sullivan. It is also their cap, the man who's in charge of all the money, Brandon Shore, is also going to be a part of that as they kind of look through this kind of group that goes across. They want to have a better, more talented roster. Part of Jeff Hafley and what he does plays a part in that as well. Kevin Stefanski lands the Falcons job. I'll go very quick on this because it's not new news, but they do get Brian Callahan as their offensive line coach. They're keeping Jeff Ulbrich as the defensive coordinator. Keep an eye on Brian Callahan, perhaps Tommy Reese being one of the guys who comes in and plays that offensive coordinator role. Obviously, you would think Brian would be a logical, person to bring in. All of these guys are connected, and your dad's the offensive line coach. I would keep an eye on that right there with Atlanta, but Matt Ryan and Kevin Stefanski have been working very diligently, I'm told, on that roster and specifically on that coaching staff. I think that's kind of the priority now. We'll look for next week for where that general manager spot goes. All right, now is Jesse Minter landing with the Raiders today? Speaking of the Raiders, I can start there if you'd like. I think Jesse Minter has a legitimate chance to land that job. I think he's not out of the running in some of those other spots, whether it be Pittsburgh, whether it be Baltimore. I do think there's connections here. There's that Michigan connection with Spytek and Tom Brady. There's definitely some connections there with what they have, and this is a copycat league in a sense. And what Mike McDonald did and is still doing up there, a lot of people like, and I know speaking to people with the Chargers, Jesse Minter is ready. He is a star in the making. He is ready to roll to be a head coach. Whether he lands a spot, TBD. But I think Jesse Minter is a name to keep an eye on. I mentioned Davis Webb before with the Raiders. I think that's a name to keep an eye on. I think there's some other ones. And do they go possibly offensive side of the ball? Clint Kubiak is still available. A lot of people connected the dots to him going to Atlanta or Miami. That ended up not happening. If you get the number 1 overall pick, and it's Mendoza, who just won a national championship. Congratulations, Indiana. Do you want to go with an offensive mind to pair with him right away? I still think there's a lot of decisions to be made there. And they met with Mike McDaniel before that national championship game down there in Miami. Mike's getting a lot of interviews for sure. All right, how about the Ravens? This one is so fascinating. When you ask people around the league, it's essentially this. I think they're going to take their time. They've interviewed a boatload of candidates, a ton of them. I think Anthony Weaver was just in there, and everybody in that building loves him. Jesse Minter, everybody in that building loves him. But do they want to go outside the box of what they're normally done? They're a team that has gone outside the box before, kind of go about this process differently than, say, other teams will. They have a lot of really strong structure in place within the organization that may allow them to take a risk. Some people kind of think, in the draft, they sit there and they wait and they wait, and you go, oh my God, when they make a pick, that's a Ravens player. This could happen within their coaching search too. They sit here and wait, jobs get filled, and then you look at who they picked and you go, oh, that's a slam dunk. I think Sean McDermott would be an interesting look. I think they are being very diligent, and they seem to be the team not really in a rush. How about the Pittsburgh Steelers and where they're at right now? Obviously, there's been a lot of push from certain pundits about Mike McCarthy and what kind of fit he makes. And obviously, he's a Pittsburgh guy, loves being a Pittsburgh guy. Could he be the guy to keep Aaron Rodgers there in Pittsburgh? There's a chance. I would say he'd be the one guy that would maybe have the ability to possibly do that. I'll just throw this out there, though. Why wouldn't Aaron Rodgers? Well, never mind. I won't throw it out there. And it would be different than what they've usually done in Pittsburgh. When I look at the 9 round one interviews they've had, 6 of the 9 have been younger defensive coordinators or defensive coaches. That's what they look for. They look for young defensive coordinators, defensive coaches, and they bring them in for an eternity. They've done it before, and that's kind of their mold. Do they break the mold with Mike McCarthy? I do think that's a possibility. I wouldn't either, speaking of breaking their mold, I wouldn't be shocked if Shieldhouse got this job, Nate Shieldhouse from the Rams. I wouldn't be shocked if he was just the young up-and-coming coach that they saw and put their eye on and said, this guy's going to be here for 20 years in our mind, hopefully. I wouldn't be shocked by that either. By the way, McCarthy does have a relationship with Omar Khan, the general manager. Obviously, he knows plenty of people there, and they know him. With the Browns, I still am like, and I said this a long time ago to you guys. I think when the opening came, I said, don't sleep on Jim Schwartz. I still think he's a possibility. They don't want to lose him as a general manager. They're not entirely sure, where everything is going offensively with the quarterback spot. What if he ends up hiring a decent offensive coordinator? I think with their love for Jim Schwartz, it may hurt what they're looking at on the defensive side of the ball in terms of candidates. I think round 2, Schwartz actually went yesterday, so he's still in the running. That's why I said this. Todd Monken, I believe, is today. Mike McDaniel is Wednesday. Jesse Minter is also, I think, later this week. And then Shieldhouse is part of that as well. I'm still not sleeping on Jim Schwartz landing this job for his second opportunity as a head coach. All right, and how about the Cardinals? Let's get through that. And I think there's a chance Vance Joseph returns there. He was a defensive coordinator for Cliff Kingsbury when he was there. He ends up coming back to Denver where he was a head coach and has been brilliant running this defense for Sean Payton. And I think he does have a realistic chance of landing that job in Arizona. I mentioned earlier about Sean McDermott and some people saying he doesn't, part of a rebuild. If I'm Arizona, personally, I'm pulling out all the stops to try to get Sean to come down here and change the culture and change where we're at as an organization, because this is it's a tough spot to come in and coach. You look at the other 3 teams in the division, they're outstanding. And the other 3 teams in the division's coaches are outstanding. So it is an uphill climb for sure. I wouldn't sleep on Vance Joseph in that spot either. I know Joe Brady's kind of in the mix as well. All right, what else do we have? You guys got coming in this chat. I've been kind of neglecting. Dallas DC is. I really have heard great things about Christian Parker, who has come, is the passing game coordinator, I want to say, and the defensive backs coach there for Vic Fangio. He is kind of Vic's right-hand man, to my understanding, in Philadelphia, and he is outstanding. And if you remember, I believe he came to Denver and was there with Nathaniel Hackett, I want to say, that he came in, and he was kept because of how good of a coach he was. And Denver didn't want to give him up, working with Pat Surtain and guys like that. And he worked with guys up in Green Bay, and he's been outstanding in Philadelphia. I know his interview went very, very well with the guys in Dallas. I wouldn't sleep on Gannon either, as they're kind of have whittled it down. I think the decision could be sooner than later. I see no Vance Joseph. Okay. Feels like McDermott, McCarthy job, Steelers roster is a joke. Never mind the spoiled fan base and ownership. I would just say it's like a blue blood franchise that is very patient, has good ownership, is well run. Is the roster outstanding? No. It's almost in time for a full reset in Pittsburgh. I would say it's kind of an aging roster with no quarterback. I think Mike McCarthy has the ability to develop quarterbacks too, whether that's Will Howard or somebody else. But that's kind of where that is right now. Cardinals' job in that division looks like a nightmare job. Yeah, that's the one that's kind of an issue. Like you look at what else is happening there, you're going, whew, man. Okay, there's a question there. I had some notes here, and I wanted to get to it about the Chargers offensive coordinator job, and I wanted to get to that because what you are going to do, and the two things that you are looking at, really, is you're looking at it's going to be Jim Harbaugh's it's going to be Jim Harbaugh's system, and it's going to be that smash mouth run game that Jim loves. How do you adapt what you can bring to the table to go along with that? And so I do think there's an aspect of Arthur Smith that plays a role in that. There's an aspect of I'm looking at my notes here in front of me. There's an aspect of kind of like some of the things Daboll or these guys can do. I think this is a big hire, but at the same time, whoever's calling the plays has to know or running that offense has to know they're going to run Jim Harbaugh's system essentially, and the run game is a big part of it. So how do you sell that part to them? All right, where are we at? Did they hire Blau OC as an OC out of panic? No, I think the relationship with Jaden's important. What they want to do is important. Commanders DC, I'm not entirely sure yet. Philly OC, interesting. I know a lot of people like think the top two candidates are Mike McDaniel and Brian Daboll. They are interviewing those guys. I mean, they are interested in those guys. I don't know how much the interest is mutual with those guys in this position as well. Daboll obviously has that relationship with Jalen Hurts when he coached him at Alabama for a year. He has that relationship with Saquon Barkley when he coached him with the Giants. I still think the league really does think that Brian Daboll is a good offensive mind. I think this is a monster hire for Nick Sirianni, though. I think it's very important, and I'm interested to see what happens to the rest of the staff. I do think if they lose Christian Parker, that's a big loss for their defensive side of the ball. Doesn't anyone want Zach Taylor? Ouchtown population Zach Taylor. I do know a lot of people want that job. They want to work with Joe Brady. Joe Burrow. I think that's something that is the adverse side. And I would say this, there are definitely candidates that have their eye on that job, whether it's next year or the following year, if things don't go well in Cincinnati for a chance to work with Joe Burrow. What do you got? Do you see the Raiders throwing caution to the wind and getting a young guy with potential for the rebuild? That's what I was thinking about, where like I do know they have legitimate interest in Davis Webb. And I could see him being like the guy where you go, I know he's 30. I know he's never called plays, but what does he bring with him? I would also say Vance Joseph, where he goes, if he gets that Arizona job, does he take Davis Webb? I know there's some people in Denver, this is a sidebar, are curious if Vance Joseph gets a job, who he takes with him. I think there's several guys that would want to go with VJ, and that could change things from a team that's in the AFC Championship game right now. I do think like these younger guys do intrigue Tom Brady and company about where they're at. You may have covered this, but where you at in the Petzik hire? I would say this. There was a lot of buzz for Drew earlier a few years ago in the offensive mind that he is. I would say this. He's very bright. He's very well respected by other offensive minds in the NFL. Take that for what it's worth. Dan Campbell obviously will have a very large say in how this offense is run anyways, but I don't think it's a bad hire. I do think everybody was like thinking like shoot for the moon and go Mike McDaniel. I'm not even sure there was a whole lot of realistic chances of that happening. I just think this is a very, very bright offensive mind. I'm not saying he's Ben Johnson. That guy is just, he is who he is, and I don't want to make any comparisons. But you could say like it's in the same mold and style that they had success with, and that's kind of what Drew is. Do you see Brian Flores getting the Steelers job? He's definitely in that group of guys where we look at where they're at in style, age, leadership, all of that stuff. I think Flo checks a lot of those boxes, certainly. I don't think the Steelers have a problem with the ongoing situation that's happening right now, which the lawsuit is still a part of things, but that's neither here nor there. All right, let me get to CJ Stroud real quick and say that there is a decision to be made. They need to decide whether they're going to pick up his fifth-year option. The Panthers just recently announced that they are picking up Bryce Young's fifth-year option. Do I think they do? I do think the Texans pick it up. But I think you look at everything that transpired this year, and this is where the evaluation comes. I don't think the Texans have gone through their entire offseason look at the entire year and what they liked, what they didn't like, what's correctable, what's not correctable. But I do know this. It was a very paint-by-numbers type of thing with Bobby Slowick there first. It was that Shanahan system. You know where you're going with the ball. Boop, 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 boop. But at the same time, Stroud thought he was kind of limited at the line of scrimmage, couldn't make all the changes he wanted to. So they went to and answered his prayers essentially and got Nick Caley to come in and run what, it's more complicated, but motions and different ownership at the line of scrimmage and different things that he can do at the line that he wanted to beat teams mentally. It's a big adjustment. It's a big change. The offensive line was better than it was 2 years ago, better than it was last year, but it still wasn't outstanding. He had almost all new pass catchers outside of Nico Collins and Dalton Schultz, and the rest of the receiving group was new. You lose Joe Mixon as your running back, but at the same time, the counter argument is Davis Mills won 3 games in this system. He went 3-0 and helped them, and the turnovers were a big issue. I think the confidence is what they want to look at. Talking to people this morning, it thought the confidence might be shot in some sense. How does it come back? In what manner does it come back? Does it come back? That's what Houston's evaluating. I still think in terms of the outer talent, he can make every throw on a football field, but it is a big decision for them to make. I think teams around the league will be curious about what Houston's deciding to do because they might be going, change of scenery, lots of talent. We can work with this. But it was about as bad as you can play in that divisional round game against the Patriots. He plays just bad and they win that game. So the confidence part is the part that I think Houston is most likely looking at. Is Philip Rivers a realistic coaching candidate for anyone? I don't think so. I think he seems very pleased with the attention and even being considered. But I actually, as these things are now starting to speed up and seats are getting filled, I'm hearing less and less about his name entirely. I think Harbaugh is already bringing Morton from Baltimore already. All right. Who do you think you choose for Giants OCDC? I think Orr might be headed there. We'll see. Nothing's completely in there. As far as head coach McDaniel, OC, possible for for Buffalo. I think Buffalo is really going to look offense. Honestly, I really kind of do. Should Steelers hire Kubiak? I think you would want to know who your quarterback is and what type of system works for him. I think Kubiak. A lot of people thought his dad wouldn't make a great head coach, and he's a Super Bowl winning head coach. So I'm just kind of curious about that. Chris Shula, his name's popped up in a couple of these, but I haven't heard it honestly as high as Shieldhouse in some of these spots. In all honesty, McDaniel's OC, McDermott DC for the Giants. Woo, reaching for the being Chris Linderbaum, a good candidate to get signed by Harbaugh for center. Yeah, he is a free agent for sure. All right, I got a couple minutes left. I want to talk about Jarrett Stidham very quickly because this is our co-pilot question as well. I asked co-pilot, what was the last time a QB made their first start for a team in the postseason? According to co-pilot, the most recent completed instance of a quarterback making his first start for a team in the postseason was Frank Reich. Remember that? Oh, running off the field. Huge comeback against the Houston Oilers in 1992. What a game that was in the wild card round. Jarrett Stidham's going to attempt to now go and do this. I would say Sean Payton loves Stiddy. I would add that. He's a backup for a reason. I would add that. If there were 34 teams in the NFL, I think he'd be a starter. I think he's in that conversation with Mac Jones and maybe Malik Willis. I can't think of some other guys, but like one of the best backups in football, I would say. He repeatedly has annoyed the hell out of starting defenses. I know this because I've talked to the players, whether they're in Vegas, New England, or Denver. He's super competitive. Don't think the spot's going to be too big for him mentally. I think he'll be fine in that sense. I was told from people in Denver, we'll have a good plan for him. We think he'll be confident. If J.K. Dobbins plays and the run game is back a little bit, that could be helpful in some sense. For sure, they need to run the ball. I think what they're missing most is the Bo Nix magic in the fourth quarter. The athletic ability, run around, make plays in big moments. That's what Bo is known for in his 2 years. I think that's what they're going to be missing most. But I will put this out there, and I think it's fascinating. Josh McDaniels loved Jarrett Stidham. And if there wasn't a COVID-shortened season that first year, I think he probably would have been the starter. When I short season, like they missed a lot of the offseason. I think he would have won the job and been the starter in New England. Josh McDaniels goes to Vegas. He actually trades for Jarrett Stidham and brings him in. If that shows you the affinity that the opposing OC has for him, and the reason I bring that up is I think Josh is an X factor in this. I think he's going to tell Mike Vrabel everything he knows about Stiddy, about what he likes, what he dislikes, what he likes to go against, what he doesn't like to go against. I think that's a fascinating matchup that there's somebody in that other building that knows him very, very well. He has a lot of respect around the league. I'm not going to lie. I'm not saying, a backup coming in hasn't taken a snap all year. He's barely taken snaps in practice. This is an uphill climb for Denver, certainly. They have some shortage health-wise at receiver, certainly. But I do think it's fascinating because Stidham is an interesting prospect who was a five-star recruit to Auburn. So again, I'm not trying to overblow it. I know he's a backup, but it is just fascinating to see how this goes. All right, Bridgewater and Winston did great as backups. That's true. That's a great point. They did great as backups with Sean Payton. He made sure, look at the turnovers he cut down for Jameis Winston. I think he threw 30 before he got there as the backup. Ends up playing. Teddy won 5 straight, I think, in New Orleans for Sean Payton. I think that was it. Now Kubiak to the Ravens. They could sit there and wait. And it's funny, like I mentioned, Baltimore may just be that playing that patient game. They've interviewed 1 million people already. And what happens if like these spots keep getting filled and then it seems very Ravens to go, oh, the guy who's running one of the best offenses in football, Clint Kubiak is now our next head coach. Like I could see that. I could see a lot of things happening with what's going on there. Josh McDaniels to Buffalo. I don't know if Josh is getting another head coaching opportunity. The other two, it's just such an enigma. It's gone so well in New England as an offense coordinator, and it's gone so bad in Denver and Vegas as a head coach. I just think they've found their pairing with him and Mike Vrabel, and he gets to work with Drake May moving forward. I think I see Josh staying there. Sean Payton's records with backups is insanely good. Don't sleep on Stiddy. They paid him to be. Okay, and I'll answer Cliff Kingsbury before we go. You have to remember, when Sean Payton took the job 3 years ago, he made a couple of signings right out of the gate. Bang, 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 immediately. Mike McGlinchey, right tackle. Ben Powers on the offensive line to solidify things and paid handsomely for both of those. He got Jarrett Stidham at the very first day of free agency. He went out and gave him 2 years, $10 million, $5 million a year as their backup in those first 2 years because he knew there was value in bringing him into the building, which I always thought was interesting. Where do you think Cliff is going to end up? Fascinating, because it was a very mutual parting of the ways, a lot of disagreements about where everybody felt this offense was going and how it was being run. There was always a little buzz, and I actually didn't know why of Cliff landing with the Kansas City Chiefs. Eric Bieniemy was always going to most likely slide back into that job. I'm not sure where Cliff goes. It might be an OC somewhere. Cliff is the type of guy also that would take a year off, possibly. I'm not saying he would, not saying I spoke to him, but I could see that happening if it's not exactly the right spot for him. But I actually have not heard his name lately right now. Cliff is the Giants OC. I have not heard that, but we'll see what's happening. But I think that's these Cliff jobs here at the end. We're going to do what's going on. DC replacement targets. I heard somebody earlier, and now I'm trying to remember who I had heard. Can't remember. It's bad on me. I can't remember. That's bad on me right there. I apologize. There's a good chance Buffalo would just trade everyone out and just start over. There's roster holes there for sure. I think Sean McDermott made that clear also. Some of his frustration during the season, there are definitely some holes in that roster. I love all the participation, guys. I really appreciate everybody chiming in. You look at all of these, it's outstanding. So I appreciate it. I'll be back next Tuesday at 2 o'clock Eastern to continue to go through this coaching cycle, really. And guess what? We'll know who's in the Super Bowl when that goes down. So we'll talk about Super Bowl kind of matchup a little bit. We'll talk about more of these head coaching guys, and then we'll get closer and closer. Who knows? Draft and free agencies right around the corner. All right, everybody, appreciate you spending time with me. Appreciate you jumping in here on this chat too. I appreciate it. So thank you so much, and really appreciate it. Take it easy.